I think I'm going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. We want to make the best use of the hour that we have here together. Welcome, everyone. I think this event today promises to be a really fantastic discussion with three industry-leading executives. I'm Ben Bailey. I'm a Global Account Director with JLL, and I have the privilege of moderating the discussion today. I'm also one half of the Coronet Carolinas Chapter Diversity and Inclusion Committee, along with Tony Perez, whom some of you may know. Our committee's goal is to increase underrepresented minority membership in the chapter and to promote diversity, inclusivity, and awareness among all of our membership. I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge the efforts of a couple of folks without whom this would not have been possible. The first is Amanda Schumacher and her administrative support in helping to set this up, and she'll help to facilitate us as we go through our conversation today. And also the leadership of our chapter president, Anna Marshall, whom you'll hear from in just a minute as we get started. But before I turn it over to her, I ask that everyone keep their lines on mute. Your line has been placed on mute, so please keep your line on mute. If you have a comment or question, please use the chat feature that's available through the Zoom meeting. And we'll do our best to check in from time to time and relay those questions to our panel here. With that, I'll turn it over to Anna for some opening comments.
Thank you, Ben. And on behalf of the Coronet Global Carolinas chapter, I want to welcome everyone to this virtual event. What a year it has been. I think in an ideal world, we would be able to have these amazing conversations in person and face-to-face. But with a mindset of resiliency, a topic we are going to cover today, we're hosting this virtually. So for those of you who are attending a Coronet Carolinas event for the first time, the mission of our chapter is to advance the practice of corporate real estate and connect groups of professionals in order to advance knowledge, promote personal excellence, and add value to each individual in their respective enterprises. This would not be possible without all of our annual sponsors, but I would like to specifically thank our diamond sponsors, BPR, JLL, and CBRE for their support. While our mission is centered around the corporate real estate practice, I know that we are all so much more than our professional accomplishments. Our parents, artists, athletes, musicians, and more. And if there's anything that this pandemic has taught us, is that authentic and meaningful connections with one another are crucial. The relationships we have with each other, backgrounds and personal experiences have shaped how we've gotten through these past few months, but also how we show up as leaders, regardless of where you are in your career, to this conversation today. I would love to thank our esteemed and industry-leading panelists, Kevin, Bruce, and Douglas, for being here today. And taking the time to share their own personal experience and guidance with us, but also Ben Bailey and with Lenovo and Tony Perez with Colliers for organizing today's event. I want to make sure we have as much time as possible for this powerful conversation, so my chapter announcements are quick. We hope that you will be joining us for upcoming events in August. On the 6th, we have a virtual event titled Building Your Brand Through LinkedIn. And on the 19th, our second annual virtual speed networking event with leaders from Atrium Health, Colliers International, JLL, Little, CBRE Bearings, and more. Finally, a quick note that we're actually transitioning our major fall event, Mega event, and Core Awards to virtual this year. Call for content will begin soon for the Mega event and close on August 10th. And the Core Awards will actually be hosted virtually on November 5th, so we hope you save the date. More information will come for both of these events, but for now, I'm actually going to hand it back over to you, Ben, to kick off today's program. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Anna, and for your leadership around this topic. So we got an exciting conversation, as I said, and some really phenomenal panelists that we're going to be talking to here today. So looking to have a really engaging conversation, excited about that. Wanted to cover off really on two themes, one being, you know, the crisis that we find ourselves in today with COVID-19, and the other being really the social movement that is become apparent over the past 2 months or so following the death of George Floyd. Both are really important topics and have had a lot of professional implications. So we want to talk through that and hear some from our leaders here today that we have on the line. in terms of setting up the conversation, so the way I would like to conduct this, if possible, is it's going to be a little bit less of a kind of a Sunday morning political panel show, and perhaps a little bit more of a Saturday afternoon Black barbershop, if I could be so bold. And for those of you who are not as familiar with what it's like inside of Black barbershop, I myself haven't been there in a long time. I haven't had the need, but it's actually a pretty special place. And what happens there oftentimes is that ideas are exchanged. People are in a very comfortable place. Truths are shared. And it's just an all-around very democratic place where a lot of opinions can be shared. And the expectation is that everyone there is comfortable within their own skin and comfortable being who they are. And I hope that we can carry this conversation forward. And I know that with this group of panelists, I think we'll be able to do that as well. So I'm excited to have this conversation. So with that, I'm going to get into the introductions. So without further ado, first person in the chair is Kevin Henry. He is an Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer at Extended Stay for America, Extended Stay America. He's a trailblazing business leader and a community leader with more than 30 years of experience and has served in the C-suite for 4 publicly traded companies, numerous board appointments, including Life Lead International, and he currently serves as Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees for Johnson C. Smith University. Bruce Kimbrough is the Senior Vice President and Corporate Properties Group Leader for Wells Fargo, where he's responsible for 6,000 retail properties around the U.S. Prior to his current role, he was the COO for JLL's Wells Fargo account and the Alliance Director for numerous high-profile accounts. A longstanding champion of diversity and inclusion, his most recent corporate social responsibility efforts are focused on supporting Wells Fargo's mobile pantry program to provide food to individuals and families impacted by COVID-19. Last, but certainly not least, is Douglas Edwards. Douglas is the Senior Vice President of Workplace Experience for Humana, where he provides executive leadership of real estate, HR shared solutions, workplace services, and aviation. Renowned for building high-performing teams, they're customer-centric. Douglas has a long track record of leading large and complex organizations throughout his career. His leadership also extends to the community, where he currently serves on the board of directors for Goodwill Industries of Kentucky, the Lincoln Foundation of Louisville, the Louisville Zoo, and NC State University Libraries. So all these guys keep themselves very busy. So very happy to have you guys on. And I think we can switch over to the video now as we begin the panel conversation. And I think where we'd like to start, again, trying to engage the audience here and looking to get some perspective. You have to bear with me, I'm a little bit of a history nerd, so we're gonna take a poll. I often think about, various events in history and think about, what it would have been like to live through those events. And so the first question here that we would like to share with you, and I'll ask everyone to respond to this. So think about people 20, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, how they'll think back on this COVID crisis. And how do you think it will compare to some of the other crises we've seen in the past? Will it be more like the Great Recession, the Great Depression, or the fall of the Roman Empire? So if you could, please work on that. And while we're doing that, I'm going to ask our panelists to weigh in here. What do you guys think? Perhaps we can start with Kevin. Do you have an opinion on that? Where you think this crisis will fall?
Sure. I chose the Great Depression, and when I look back and like you, Ben, I'm a bit of a history buff, and certainly heard stories from relatives who lived during that period. It was transformative across a bunch of different spectrums, social spectrums, economic spectrums, had global implications as it related to how the U.S. positioned itself relative to other countries. I think we'll look at this at some point in the future, and we'll see lots of similarities. The root cause obviously is different, but it'll certainly be a good place to be from. and certainly something and an experience that we would all and hopefully future generations would learn from.
Excellent. Bruce, how about you? You have an opinion?
Yeah, and I too chose the Great Depression, and I liken it to, you had mentioned earlier that I am involved in helping Wells Fargo select real estate for mobile food pantries. And as I volunteered at a couple of these pantries, what's really struck me is the level of food insecurity that is out there that we're just not even aware of. I mean, people, so these are all mobile based on social distancing. So you drive your car through, you pop open your trunk, but I see folks in Mercedes, SUVs coming through because they are food insecure at this time. So I think, honestly, we are at the front end of what we are going to see economically from this pandemic. So I think there's a lot to come.
That's really sobering. You're going to have to give us some positive news later to balance that out. So just be ready.
The positive news is I too don't go to the barbershop, so I miss those conversations. But I do get to take my boys, so there you have it.
All right, fair enough. How about you, Douglas? Is Douglas on? Did we lose him? Hopefully he'll make it back.
I should probably unmute myself, right? That'll probably work better. So, but that's because I don't go to the barber shop where I can learn how to use Zoom properly, right? So that's part of the reason why I messed that up. But you know, so what Kevin said, what Bruce said, you know, I agree with. I think it's, you know, probably more like the Great Depression, because I think with the amount of, and quite frankly, I think if you look at the amount of money that we're infusing back into the economy, due to this kind of new recession that we're going into, there'll be a reconciliation for the amount of money that we're borrowing just to try to prop this economy up, you know, trillions of dollars. And I think the story is yet to be told on what the borrowing that we're doing to prop up the economy is going to do to our economy long term. So I think we're in for kind of a longer kind of, you know, protracted recession. But I'll also say a bit, Ben, I would say there's two things on here there's two things that come to mind that are not on here that really kind of, to me, is kind of synonymous with what we're facing today. I would say, for me, the moment we're in right now is a combination of the civil rights movement, quite frankly, and the Spanish flu. And I certainly hope it doesn't become as bad as the Spanish flu, but to me, what I hope we're going through today is a movement that's sustainable, that will bring long-lasting change. And this is not just another kind of blip on the radar screen where people are playing, you know, the political football with regards to what we're seeing today. So I certainly hope this crisis that we're in right now looks more like the civil rights movement, quite frankly.
Yeah. No, that's a great comment, and preview some of our conversation a little bit later. So look forward to getting into that. And it looks like we were right. So the wisdom of the audience was spoken, and maybe you guys influenced that, but everyone else felt like the Great Depression is similar to where we're at now as well. Some very pessimistic folks with the fall of the Roman Empire. Let's hope not. But Kevin, I'm going to come to you with this next question. So you've been around a while, as I said, and you've been very successful. So you've seen a lot. What, from your perspective, if you think about some of the other crises that you've been in, share some stories from that. What did you find about those and take away from them?
Yeah, Ben, I'll start first by saying I've been around for a little while, but you make me sound like I'm 100. I peaked early. I still have still have and I do go to the barbershop, but in terms of, but I have seen a lot, and in terms of other crises, and perhaps what I've learned, one, you know, this is my own view, and I'll just offer this as a little bit of a qualifier. I have a very strong faith position, personally, and it's mine. And I'm not bashful about it, but one of the things that it teaches me is to kind of be aware of the things that you can control and do something about, and be aware of the things that you can't. And one of the reasons I do go to the barbershop, I still have all my hair, I don't have any ulcers, is because I tend to put things in perspective very quickly and control what you can control. Certainly acknowledge, accept, be aware of, proact or react to those things that you can't. But very quickly try to identify and understand the levers that you can impact and influence to try to manage yourself or lead yourself and others through some of these crises. Crises are a humbling thing. And one thing I have learned very consistently is you can't get out of them by yourself. You can't operate in a vacuum. And you've got to be solicitous, you've got to be collaborative. You have to know kind of what you do and do well and know what you don't do as well. And align with others who bring strength where maybe you exhibit weakness. And collectively and collaboratively work together to persevere and see your way through whatever the challenge or whatever the crisis is. The other thing I've learned is to be optimistic. Optimism, it's infectious, it's inspiring, and particularly if you're in a leadership role, lead in a way that inspires others to see the opportunity for success. And, as a leader, you've got to carry that flag and you've got to get people to follow your lead. Even when it doesn't look, the picture doesn't maybe look as rosy as you'd like it to be. There are brighter days on the other side. You just have to get to them.
Very, very insightful, and something that I've lived in my experience as well. Being optimistic when you don't necessarily have much of a reason to be, but driving yourself to do that for the benefit of those around you. So thank you for those comments. Douglas, I'm going to turn to you. So you've seen a fair amount too, right? And instead of talking about one of your experiences, maybe you can just share with us, what was your process for managing through those, and how did you sustain yourself?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. If you think about, for me, from a crisis standpoint, and as I think about that with regards to my career, I kind of go back to the time I was in business school. I think some of you might remember the dot-com burst back in the early 2000s, along with the accounting scandals. Remember Enron, that company? Arthur Andersen, WorldCom, and then obviously, I think all of us remember, unfortunately, what happened on 9/11. So a combination of all those things impacted the economy in a very significant way. And I remember going to business school, and there was a number of reasons why I went to business school, but part of the reason why I went to business school is I thought I could make more money coming out of business school with multiple job offers. That didn't actually happen that way because I came out during a recession. What I would say is this when it comes to a crisis. A crisis could be an economic crisis. It could be a personal crisis. You might have a personal crisis in your life, but what I would say about crisis, I think we all know this, is that you can't predict them. You can't predict when something bad is going to happen, when something kind of happens, whether it's external or internal. You can't necessarily plan for that. So the way I think about it, Ben, is this: how do you think about your career from the point of being resilient and building something that's sustainable in terms of kind of how you think about yourself and the skills that you bring to the table? Because you can't predict when a crisis is going to happen. So you have to build resiliency in terms of how you think about your career, and you have to build sustainability. And to me, the best way to do that is to not think about your career as necessarily a path that can't be flexible. You can have a goal in terms of kind of what you want to be doing long term, but the path to get to that goal is going to have to change, because crisis will happen, whether external, like what we're facing right now, or for many of you guys who are on the call today, I'm sure you probably have had personal crises that have impacted your career. So the way I try to think about it is in terms of kind of managing through a crisis and how it intersects with your career. You can have the goal and be inflexible there, but don't be inflexible on the path to get there, because that path might have to vary based on what happens to you in your life. And what I try to focus on, similar to what Kevin said, my values are rooted in my faith as well. And I would say, at the end of the day, when you're thinking about your career, focus on being, what I would say, the experiences that you get and the experiences that you want should be more important than just the role or the title, right? How do you start to look for experiences that really align to your values? that align to the culture of an organization you want to be a part of. And if you focus there, instead of being concrete and steadfast on the path to get to your goal, I think to me, that's how you build resiliency and sustainability. And that's going to, and when things happen, and you're being flexible on the path that you take because you're focused on the experiences and getting those right experiences versus being singularly focused on the goal, I think you'll find that you just have overall better sustainability to weather the storm when those crises come. Because I can guarantee you, there's absolutely no way you can predict what's going to happen to you, whether it's on the personal side or either from an external force.
Very true. Very true. Bruce, turning to you now. So looking back in hindsight, right, some of the things that you've gone through in your life, in your professional life, personal life, what were the actions that you felt like you took at the time that positioned you to do more in the future, right? They kind of set you up. Looking back, I took this action. I couldn't have predicted it, as Douglas said, but I was prepared, and it kind of set me up for something that happened later on.
Yeah, great. And you know, I'm in listening to Kevin and Doug, I feel a lot of similarities. And Doug had mentioned the .com, and when you just posed that question, everything about the .com came to mind. And I was early in my career, although I've been around for a while. I was early in my career, had a really good job working for the United States Air Force, but friends were saying the money isn't with the .com. You got to chase those .com dollars. And so I left my GS, and I don't know what I was. I might have been a GS6 or a GS7 job, and went to work for Silicon Graphics. And when things were good, things were good. I mean, at our Christmas party, Natalie Cole was there one year, and I think Bonnie Raitt or somebody was there one year. So, and the pay was slightly less than where I had left, but the upside was tremendous. The potential for upside was tremendous. And so as I sat at my desk, and I think it was 97 or 98, I don't remember, but it was right before I came to Jones Lang LaSalle, and I watched the stock price go from $47 to, I don't even remember it. It was in the single digits, and it was just like a clock ticker. It was like the stock exchange ticker. And at that point, I realized a couple things. One is, to Kevin's point, you can only control what you can control. And I can't control the economy, but I can control where I work. And what I did realize for myself was that my risk tolerance isn't what it's going to take to hold out and see if I'm going to make that $1 million. And so what I did was I promptly figured out, where is my risk tolerance? What career field should I be in, and what does that look like? And I left and came to Jones Lang LaSalle, or I should say went to Jones Lang LaSalle, as I'm not there anymore, but spent the next 18 years there. But I think what was really important for me through that all was understanding kind of who I am, what my risk tolerance was, but also understanding what can I do to control this environment that is essentially uncontrollable. So I think we have to look at, you know, kind of what's going on around us with this pandemic, and what parts of what you're doing on a daily basis can you control, and what parts can't you control. And I think when you delineate the things that you have impact over, which there are plenty, and the things that you don't, it just makes for a smooth path in making those decisions that, you know, so that essentially changed my career and what came out of that crisis.
And it worked out very well.
Didn't make the millions, but had a career that I've been extremely proud of, and I wouldn't trade, I wouldn't go back.
Right on, right on. Well, that's fantastic. It turned out okay. It seems like. I've seen your house. It's pretty nice. So I'll give you that. So again, everyone on the line, please submit your questions via the Q&A. You're welcome to do that. We can certainly take questions as we go along. We'll try and save some time at the end as well, but I'll keep pushing forward. I want to pivot now to our second topic. So we talked about our current crisis that's been going on since, at the earliest, maybe November or so last year is when we heard about it. Seems like it's been dragging on forever. Well, let's talk about another crisis that has been dragging on forever. And I'm referring now to the crisis that that's been going on in this country for about 400 years. And specifically, you know, some of the oppression, discrimination, economic lack of economic opportunities, lack of investment in the Black community and other minority communities here in the United States, and the movement that's been sparked as a result over the past couple of months, again following the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer. So we have another poll question for you guys. If you can pop that one up, Amanda, I would appreciate it. What we want to ask here is there's been a lot of conversation right now about corporate America and within corporate America and within society in general. But the question really is, what do we expect will come of all of these corporate statements that we've seen lately around social equity, around Black Lives Matter? It definitely seems like there's a lot of momentum out there. But what do we think is actually going to happen? We've seen some of this before. We've seen talk before. But what do we expect this time? And again, I want people, remember, we're in the barbershop. Everyone's welcome. Everyone has an opinion. Please express it. What do we think is actually going to happen here, right? And so again, I'm going to turn it over. I'll turn it over to our team here. And Bruce, I think maybe I'll start with you this time and allow you to comment on that.
Yeah, you know, so and you know, wanting to be extremely optimistic because I am optimistic. I think what I see is a significant increase in awareness. I think people are aware now of what they may have been able to deny or been able to avoid being aware of before. I think we've got a long way to go before we see significant change. I think, but what's come out of this, which I do not feel has come out of anything, at least that I can remember in the recent past, is the ability to have dialogue, the ability to talk about, the ability to acknowledge. So from the poll question, I see increased awareness. I'm not at the point where I see significant change. And I'd ask Doug and Kevin, do they see it differently?
No, you know, Bruce, I'm with you. I am cautiously optimistic. I think it's still a bit early to say that there's going to be significant change, but I'm certainly cautiously optimistic. This is what I'll say about what we're seeing today, which has been different from other moments in history in the past, 10, 15, 20 years, is that I think the diversity of the people that you're seeing in this conversation looks different than what we've seen in other, call it what you want, movements. When I watch TV and look at some of the crowds, and I'm talking outside of corporate America here, but just kind of what we're talking about here, there's just as, I see, many people who are not African-American in the crowds as many as African-Americans. So I think that's the difference, is that you're seeing the diversity of of the people who are asking for change look different. So that's why I'm cautiously optimistic. I would say the thing I'm most concerned about that would keep this from being a significant change in corporate America is that the other thing that is distracting corporate America, and rightfully so, is COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And right now for many companies, yes, this is something that they're focused on, but COVID-19 is still, for most companies, their #1 priority in dealing with that. So I would say, and I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm just saying I think the only thing that we're potentially fighting against in terms of having our companies be focused on this is the dual focus on this pandemic and having to deal with that. It's kind of in some ways maybe working against it, but again, I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, Kevin, obviously, I personally, I'm being unapologetically Black, and I am being intentionally agitating to the point of driving change. Now, let me step back, and again, I've been around a while. I've been in the C-suite for 25 years. And so I've worked with lots of CEOs, I've worked with lots of boards. fortunately, I know lots of CEOs and interact with lots of folks in different organizations, many of your organizations. And what I have found is it's important to be bold, but to be wise. And again, unapologetically Black, I'm bold in the expression of my outrage, my controlled outrage, but intentional in trying to drive specific, meaningful, and lasting change. I'll just give you a quick example. Just last week, I was having a conversation with my CEO and some of my board members, and we were talking about persons of color and African Americans, and I said, no, the term is Black. And they said, no, but people of color. And I said, no, right now we're talking about Black people. And George Floyd was Black. And so let's talk about Black people. And well, what can the board do? You can put more Black people on the board. What can you do? I can hire more Black executives. My concern, and I say this very respectfully, but my concern is right now there's an outrage, and a lot of the outrage is because not what we've been experiencing, but it's based on what people saw and how heinous the act was in Minneapolis. And so people are feeling bad. And a lot of people are feeling bad about themselves because they either weren't aware that this was happening or they historically had done nothing to keep these things from happening. And my concern is once people who today feel badly about themselves feel better about themselves or good about themselves, then the momentum will stop. And the question for people is, at what point do you feel better or do you feel good? Is it because you've attended a protest or 2 protests or 3 protests? Is it because you've given $10 or $1,000? Is it different people have different thresholds. And my concern is absent real, lasting, sustainable change that can only be driven by policy, legislation, and consequence, that you're going to see this momentum abate at some point, and it'll be replaced by the next crisis, which we talked about earlier. And so unapologetic, passionate, outraged, respectful, productive, purposeful, pick your words. But I'm less than optimistic, but I'm accountable.
Powerful comments, powerful. So votes are in, real action and results, 51%, just by a nudge. So that's something, and I think encouraging there. But I'm looking now at some of the comments, some of the questions that are coming through, and I appreciate everyone submitting those. The first one that I see on here is from Anuj Dalal. Good to have you on, Anuj. And I think I'll throw this on. You kind of already addressed this, Kevin, but I think I'll throw it at Bruce. And really, it's what would you recommend the best means of ensuring that the focus is on social equity and racial equality turns into action, that it goes beyond just lip service?
Yeah, that's a great question, and Anuj, thanks for that question. And I smiled as soon as I saw that name. Me and Anuj and I should say, go way back. And I think to Kevin's point, sometimes like you say here, a position of privilege does make empathy difficult. But to Kevin's point, folks feel bad. There's an air out there now where that position of privilege, although white privilege, although it's something that's been around forever, it's something that you hear now in very frequent circles, and not only in the barbershop, but my boss's boss had a conversation with me about white privilege, and he said, well, what are your thoughts on white privilege? And I gave him a story, and I said, white privilege transcends all levels of whiteness. I mean, I said, my wife is a dentist in a federal prison, or in a prison, not a federal prison, but in a prison. And this is 2020, and inmates will come in and request to see someone else. Now, that's white privilege in the sense that you have no money, you have no insurance, you have dental pain, but you still think you have the option to see a dentist that looks more like you. And so I explained, or I had that conversation with my boss's boss, and I said, so it is pervasive throughout all of society, and we have to be aware that it is real. And I think we have to now capitalize on the fact that people are willing to have that dialogue. People are willing to look in the mirror. And how do we get that dialogue and that look in the mirror to result in action? And I think that's where we as leaders have to have those conversations. And I said, you know, when I came here 2 weeks in, I went to your meeting in Minneapolis, and there were 500 people there, and there were 2 people that looked like me. And so to me, you have work to do so that when someone else comes to your meeting in Minneapolis, there are not just 2 people that look like them. And he said, well, you know, that's 2 more than before I got here. And I'm like, that's 2 too few. So I think it's just making sure that we are holding people accountable, and we are being accountable ourselves for having conversations that are productive and goal focused.
Excellent, excellent. So Douglas, I'll turn to you now, and I'll come up. We've got another question here from Bill Miller. So, being a senior leader in your organization, how are you influencing change?
Yep, and I know Bill really well, so glad to see Bill out there somewhere in Charlotte land, even though I'm sitting here in Louisville, Kentucky. So thanks for the question. In terms of how I'm influencing change, here's what I'm doing. I am making sure that I am pushing the envelope when it comes to us having uncomfortable conversations with regards to continuing to, so for example, I'll tell you, our CEO has called me on multiple occasions to have this conversation. And I'm not sugarcoating how I feel, and I'm not sugarcoating what we need to do as an organization to actually make long-term sustainable change. So I've had a number of people who have said to me here at my company, well, Douglas, you know, I'm glad we're having this conversation, but I'm emotionally fatigued right now, and I get that. I don't want to be put on the spot. We've been wanting this moment for a long time. And look, I'm sorry, but this is not the time to be shying away from this conversation. This is not the time to say, I don't want to engage in the dialogue. This is not the time to say, I don't want to be put in some type of uncomfortable spotlight. And I know everyone's kind of threshold to engage in this conversation is different, but I would just encourage all of you to push past your uncomfortableness, because there's a lot of people that came before us that were in much more uncomfortable situations and put their lives on the line, quite frankly, for all of us to be sitting here in corporate America, to be having the roles that we're in right now. So for your level of, I would just say, think about that before you decide not to engage in the conversation, not to ask the tough questions, not to continue to push your organizations to do something different. This is not the time to be shy. So what I'm trying to do is, one, tell other folks in my organization that this is not the time, remind them of that, quite frankly, and to do it myself and to role model it. So to the extent my CEO wants to have the conversation, we're going to go there. We're going to have the conversation. We're absolutely going to have the conversation. This is not the time to be shy, because I can tell you at some point in time, the momentum will start to wane. And I don't want to be going down in my own kind of personal history book that I didn't get a chance to actually, I didn't do all I can do in this moment to try to drive sustainable change. But another thing I would also say, though, too, is kind of going back to sustainability. Until there are consequences, but look, I think all of our organizations would say, if you miss earnings, then your bonuses are going to be smaller, right? We have metrics around that. Until we start to have leaders actually feel it in their own personal compensation around cultural awareness and how the organization measures up in that space around our I&D metrics, then it'll be just guidance. It'll be guidance for us to talk about I&D. There won't be really any hard thresholds for us to meet some cultural change within our organization. So for me, I'm having that conversation. I'm not going to shy away from it. And as long as that door is open, I'm going to keep running through it. And even if it's not open, I'm going to push through it as well.
Getting goosebumps. Thank you for that comment. I'm going to go back to Kevin. And I've got a question here from Abdul Khan, and really asking, what can companies do to continue the ongoing momentum here? And how do we translate it into meaningful change from a policy perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And since we're in the barbershop, man, you just tighten the brother's fade up here in the back before we're done. Though, you know, it's COVID hairdo, so I need a little help here. But,
right.
No, thanks for the question. And I saw, I think it was Corinne asked another question I'll answer at the same time about what's happened, you know, as a result of some of these conversations. I think the best thing that an organization can do is use its platform to make a difference. And my business, I'm in the hotel business. We're the largest branded company-owned portfolio of hotels in the United States, with 600 and some odd company-owned hotels, in addition to some franchise hotels. And one of the things that we did early on, you know, we certainly expressed a statement of outrage, like everybody else did, which, you know, I drafted, CEO and I sent out, which on its own was just gratuitous. Let's just call it what it is. Everybody did it. Everybody had to do it. And so he and I said very quickly, how do we put actions behind our words so that this isn't just a gratuitous statement? And something I'm very proud of, actually, we decided that we're going to use each and every single one of our hotels between now and November and turn them into voter registration centers. And not only have our employees register, but we have about 100,000 guests a night in our portfolio. And we're going to encourage and provide means through which our guests can also register. Now, we happen to be in the economy segment. And so a lot of our guests, and we're an extended stay product, so folks are with us for a long time. A lot of our guests tend to skew brown, persons of color, maybe a little bit lower on the socioeconomic strata. You know, they're not the folks that are staying in the Ritz necessarily, but they're also the people who traditionally have been impacted by voter suppression. And when you look at redistricting, and you look at kind of gerrymandering, and you look at some of the things that have occurred legally through the legislative process to keep people from executing their rights. You know, it's ironic, not a coincidence, but a catalyst that last Friday, C.T. Vivian and John Lewis passed away, two folks who gave their lives so that we could all vote and have access to voting. And so that's just one example of how we've used our platform. The night before Juneteenth, I guess June 18th, I was having a conversation with my CEO about, again, what do we do? I mean, we have to do something. We should do something because we have to put words behind actions. And we decided at about 10 o'clock at night, we didn't get the board's approval. We didn't talk to other folks on the exec team. I said to him, I think we ought to give 3% of tomorrow's revenue across the entire company, and we ought to invest it. We chose a Charlotte charity, the Urban League of Central Carolinas, so that we can put a deposit on developing an entrepreneurial institute that ultimately will create the opportunity for folks to deliver intergenerational wealth transfer. And generally, these are people, again, of persons of color and people that have been marginalized historically. And so those are just a couple of examples on how we used our platform. It made sense. We're a hotel company. We have guests. So let's access our guests. Each of you guys have access to different platforms. And so the question and the challenge is, what are you going to do to operationalize your platform so that you're actually making a difference and it extends beyond a gratuitous statement or you know, a corporate check, which you know, companies tend to do. So those are just a couple of examples. And again, I think it was Karina. You know, we've made some progress. We have a board meeting in a couple of weeks. Public company, so I can't get into too much detail. But we are going to establish specific goals. And before I'm done, you know, we'll have a Black board member. Rest assured.
That's awesome. And really creative ways of thinking about how you engage in the community and turn your words into action. So it's a great example there. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have time to get through all the questions. Really great questions and comments coming through on the chat. If you guys can see that, it's really phenomenal. I'm going to try and pick a few, and then we'll wrap it. Maybe we got to try and bring either you guys or some other folks back at some point in the future. But I wanted to get to this question that came through from Crystal Smith, and I'll kind of get to the crux of it. So, Douglas, as you mentioned, there's a lot of people in the movements out there on the streets that are not Black, and that's I think a very positive thing, that people are out there in the middle of this and taking action. What would you say to those people in terms of how they can help to support this effort and how they can become kind of really take this in and make it a part of what they're doing day to day?
No, thank you. It's a wonderful question, because it is great to see the diversity of the people, whether it's people who are protesting, whether it's some of the people that I've had a chance to talk to within my circles. It's great to see. It really is, and that's to me what makes this uniquely different from other moments in history where we've unfortunately have had to have this conversation again because there hasn't been change. So, you know, for me, here's the advice that I would give to you with regards to how you can get involved and drive change. The first thing I would say is, you know, I mean, yes, from a protesting perspective, you can absolutely do that. But if we're talking about within your organization, too often this conversation that we're having is only being had with people that look like the panel that we have here today. And I think that's been part of the problem why there hasn't been enough sustainable change with regards to what we're seeing in corporate America, or what we don't quite frankly see in corporate America. So what I would love to see, what I would encourage, you know, folks who are not Black, who are not African American, who want to lean into this conversation that we're having, is to get involved in your companies the same way, in the same way I just talked about previously. Make sure your voice is being heard. Push the envelope. I will tell you, if you're a white male, quite frankly, your voice, unfortunately, in a lot of ways is going to be louder in this conversation than mine. That's just the way I feel. And if you truly have passion around this topic, then you also speak up as well. I would also say, and that goes for white females, that goes for any other person, regardless of what color you are. If you want to be a part of this conversation, use your voice, because too often it's been only Black faces that have been trying to have this conversation within our respective organizations. So I would say, if you're on the call, please take some action in your organizations and make sure you're pushing the envelope with regards to having courageous conversations, asking tough questions, and demanding change. Also, when it comes to recruiting and developing talent, have you to think about reaching out to a person of color, someone who's Black, and saying, hey, let's get into a conversation. What's been your experience here in the organization? I want to learn. I would say do that with empathy. I would also say be very open and have grace with the person that you're talking with, because they might express a lot of passion, and you might not necessarily like what comes out of their mouth, but I would say extend some grace in that conversation, because my guess is they're going to be pretty authentic with you. So learn from some of your colleagues around you in terms of their experiences as a Black American in this country. But I would say there's a lot that goes with just listening and understanding, so you can start to create empathy and understand kind of some of the things that many of our Black colleagues in our organizations are going through. But please, if we, from a corporate America perspective, if it's only Black people who are having this conversation, then I would say it's not sustainable. I would say, please take some of the things that we're talking about here. If you got passion around this, please express it, because if we have more diverse bodies of people having this conversation in our organizations, that's where the movement's going to happen. It just can't be Black faces having these conversations with the board, with the CEO, and with our management teams.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we're gonna wind it down here a little bit. Again, great questions coming through, great comments. I'm reading them as they come in. I'm having a tough time keeping up with it all. But Bruce, I'll start with you. Are there any closing thoughts that you would like to share with this group that we have on? Uh-oh, you're on mute. I'm sure they were great. I'm sure they were great talks.
I'm done. So no, I think this has been an incredible conversation. A lot of passion. I hear and sense a lot of passion. I'm reading a lot of passion in the box. And I think, you know, the things that I would say is continue the dialogue. Don't let the dialogue stop. And in the dialogue with a takeaway, encourage folks that you're talking to educate themselves. I think that a lot of what we're seeing now is folks who came into this dialogue who felt like this was a surprise and happened yesterday, but educate themselves. Look, I mean, you can Google Black Lives Matter and a ton of stuff will come up for them to read, research, educate. And I think that is key to continuing the dialogue. And then when we are put in a position of privilege, i.e., I have been blessed with the privilege, of hiring many folks into the organizations that I've been in. And I think it is incumbent upon us to hire folks who look like us, because that's where you get real sustainable change. When you're given that opportunity and that privilege, you need to capitalize and hire folks that look just like us. And so that's what I'd leave it.
Thank you. Thank you. Douglas, would you like to go next?
You know, I agree with what Bruce said. If you are in a position of influence, which influence, call it what you want, power in your organizations, you have an obligation to hire, develop diverse talent, Black talent in your organization. I mean, look, if you're only going to use your influence for you, that's a pretty selfish position to take. I mean, I would like to hope that if you're in a position of influence, I'll tell you, the reason my passion around what I do is not necessarily the actual work, the widgets I produce, call it what you want. It's about the people. It's about the people around me. And I'm even reflecting right now and saying, hey, have I done enough? And I haven't. So my position on this is I have to do more. I got to hold myself even more accountable above and beyond what I've already done. So I would say, please, if you're whether you're a leader or not, you have power, especially our folks that are in leadership roles. Please exercise it. Please use it. It's an obligation. And I've seen some of the comments come up in terms of white allies, things of that nature. I would say, and like I just said before, if you're white, in many ways, your voice is going to carry more weight, unfortunately, than someone who's Black. Because I think Black voices are important now, but I think a year from now, I'm not sure, will the momentum be there? And that's where we're going to need many of our white colleagues helping us to continue to carry the conversation and the momentum. So that's what I would say. Let's not let this fade out a year from now, and let's continue to drive and push organizations to do more.
Thank you. Thank you. Kevin, bring us home.
Yeah. You know, I mentioned earlier my faith. One of my favorite stories, many of you are probably familiar with, is David and Goliath. And I'm from New York, so this is New Yorker's version. Big old guy from the Bronx named Goliath, little dude from Long Island named David. They got into a little bit of a scrap, some issues with each other. David was not supposed to have a chance against Goliath, armed with some stones and an attitude. And at the moment of truth, what I revere about this particular story is at the moment of truth, when he should have been quaking in his boots, turning around and running the other direction back to Long Island, David ran right at Goliath. And he took it to him right in between the eyes. We all know how that story ended. And so my advice to everybody here is be David against your Goliath. This thing is bigger than any of us. But at the moment of truth, when you're most afraid, run right at it and run with the courage and the conviction necessary to be victorious. Be bold, but be wise. But ultimately, be victorious. You all have it in you, and we need it from you.
Phenomenal comments, phenomenal. So I'm going to ask one last thing. We're not done yet. I'm going to ask for everyone building on Kevin's analogy. I'm going to ask everyone to load one stone in the sling, right? And I want you to go on record, something that I learned at one of the clients that I worked at some years ago, an I will statement. So if you could, in the chat box right now, you've heard the conversation, you've heard from these leaders, they provided a lot of insight on what we're facing, both in terms of the career challenges and crisis and the social equity situation that we have going on in this country. I want you to write an I will statement. I will do this to increase diversity and inclusion. I will do this to help the cause of social equity for Black people or disenfranchised people. Go on record right now. I encourage you, put something in here, because anytime you go on record, your studies show that you're more likely to take follow-up actions on it. So I encourage everyone to go ahead and make an I will statement and enter that into the chat box right now. I promise I won't check names and call you out later, but appreciate you guys doing that. If you're looking for an I will to take away, I've got an easy one for you. Again, along the lines of diversity and inclusion. One of the chapter events that was mentioned at the outset of this call was it was a virtual speed networking event that's scheduled for August the 19th. Come and participate in that event, right? Your inclusion, you bring the diversity, and you're able to connect with new people. You're able to make them a part of, learn from them, they learn from you, and we can make a more diverse and inclusive organization through that exercise. So that's an easy one. So you got no excuses. In closing, I just want to express my deepest appreciation to our panelists here. Really fantastic comments here today. I took a lot away, and I appreciate that. Our audience participants for coming up with such great comments, and Amanda and Anna for their support and leadership in moving this forward. If you would like to know more about joining our chapter, our programs, our membership, and becoming a part of CoreNet Carolinas, I encourage you to visit our website, carolinas.corenet.org, where you can find out more, or you can send an email to our generic email address. You can address it, attention Ben Bailey, and hopefully it'll find its way to me, and I'll do my best to respond to it. But that email address is carolinas@corenetglobal.org, and I think we can get that in the chat as well. With that, I really appreciate everyone's time and your participation. Thank you again to our panelists, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Onward and upward.